Hello and welcome to the Cuyamaga Institute, our Q&A Conversation for Exploration series. I'm Paul Robert, the Executive Director and President of the Institute, and along with my wife Laura Lee, the Director of Research, Education, and Outreach, we want to thank you for joining us today. The Cuyamaga Institute is an independent, nonprofit research organization committed to researching consciousness and the human experience following the footsteps of our founder, anthropologist Dr. Felicitas Goodman. And as an educational institution, we want to recognize that to thrive, we take an open approach. So we invite scholars in related fields of work to help broaden the scope of our own work and exploration. And that's why we call it Conversation for Exploration. And on these weekly Sunday discussions, we have a full spectrum of topics from the arts to the sciences, everything in between. So visit our website at cuyamagainstitute.com. All of our presentations are free, and as a nonprofit, we invite you to become a supporting member, and we thank you, the community members, who continue to support the mission of the Cuyamaga Institute. Today, let's step back to a time when you wanted to find your way to a restaurant or a dinner party, and you didn't have your smartphone or GPS to guide you. Man, that's a scary thought. A time when you had to depend on someone to give you directions, maybe what we call the modern oral traditions. What would it look like if we took down all the satellites, no smart technology, and we had to observe the world around us and depend on our own inner senses to guide us? Well, today we have that opportunity to hear about the ancient oral tradition of tracking. Laura.
Oh, yeah. First of all, I'm subscribed to the Londolozi daily blog, and I see what the men and women rangers and trackers there on a daily basis in Southern Africa are tracking and filming and photographing, and it's like having a whole new family halfway across the world that we can drop in on and observe and befriend all the animals there. So that's exciting. Lion tracks. We've had a little bit of experience tracking. When we came back to the Cuyamaga Institute facilities after a long winter away, we walked the grounds and we saw mountain lion tracks. What I was convinced was mountain lion tracks, big. We're going to show you some pictures later on. And they were just walking boldly right down through our pathways next to all the buildings. I could see where one had jumped up on an arroyo because I'm studying these tracks. I could see a baby track and a mama track, and widely, this mountain lion cased the joint really while we were away. And it was rather thrilling. And so we photographed it, and I actually found a local wildlife ranger. I sent him pictures. I said, "Are these mountain lions?" He goes, "Yeah." Don't worry, they're probably gone because they follow the elk, and the elk that go through. We're rather in the northern edge of Santa Fe, and so it's a little bit remote. And I thought it was so exciting to really read. Of course, the elements cooperated, and it was moist soil, so I could see the imprint. But what if there hadn't been such ideal conditions to record those tracks? Who's out there? And you get this feeling the whole time that something is watching you, but you can't see it. It was really exciting. So tracking. Oh my gosh. We have been tracking the indigenous wisdom traditions around the world and wanting to know more about them. We've looked at a lot, and we have been celebrating those who are recording and digitizing and securing these wisdom traditions for the future generations, and also making them relevant for today. And one of those traditions, one of the longest standing, is the ability to track what's in your environment that our hunter-gatherers were so versed in. Hunter-gathering, by the way, one of the earliest and most successful ways of making a living. And we were all indigenous at one point. We spent the majority of the human story as hunters and gatherers, as indigenous within indigenous cultures. So our guest today says that every human is born to track. This is something that's just in our DNA. This is something that the animals do to track who is in their environment, because they're out there surviving and negotiating and navigating it as well. So this is a skill set that is awakened in us, I think, when we start to talk to the professional trackers to understand their ways and what they're doing. And our guest today also parlays that into skill sets that we need today, that we can hone today, because we are, again, tracking, maybe not the wildlife in our environment, but we are certainly tracking each other's facial recognitions or voices. We are tracking our success, our resources, our goals, our needs. We are tracking all the time. And I think he's got some very exciting and informative and important lessons for us to learn. And he is Alex van der Heever. He is the co-founder of the Tracker Academy and the author of a couple of books, The Tracker Manual, A Practical Guide to Animal Tracking in Southern Africa, and Changing a Leopard's Spots, more autobiographical. We are so pleased to welcome you here today, Alex. Thank you for joining us, and welcome.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you, Laura. And thank you, Paul. It's an honor to be here. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, I really enjoyed your book. I haven't read the Tracker Manual, but I certainly enjoyed Changing a Leopard's Spots, your story. So why don't we begin with your story and tell us, how did you get involved? What was the call to adventure that you answered that found you out there in the bushveld of Southern Africa? This is where you grew up, right? Yeah.
Yes, very much so. A lot of people ask me that question, and the truth is, I don't believe there was a moment. There was no event. It was, for as long as I remember, I've wanted to live amongst wild animals in wild places. When I actually grew up on the coast, south coast of South Africa, and I remember playing hide and go seek with my friends, and I was always very good at finding my friends who were hiding. And one day they said, "Oh, we know what you're doing. You're following our footprints." And I said, "Yes, but that's pretty obvious. Aren't you all doing that?" It turned out I was the only one who's following their footprints. and so I don't know.
Born to track. Yeah.
And that's why I do believe we're all born to track. But I think if there was, people like to know a poignant moment in my life was when I went on a lion hunt as I think I was around 10 years of age with my grandfather. We shot a young male lion who'd been eating his cattle, and that moment, seeing that animal die, it just cemented for me that I wanted to dedicate my life to the preservation of wild animals, not the hunting or shooting of. So that was, I can remember the smells, the taste in my mouth. I can remember that like it was yesterday. So that certainly gave me some direction, but I was always going to go. When I left school, my father forced me to go and do a business degree. I ended up doing a 1 year of marketing. I promised him I'd go back, and I went to the bush for a year, and that was 26 years ago.
Well, what you're doing and employing the skills of tracking is actually helping that early mission of yours, because you say that, who's utilizing your services and tracking? It's all for ecological and preservation purposes and ecotourism, isn't it?
Absolutely. So Tracker Academy's work serves the conservation industry through three sectors. The one is the anti-poaching, and some of you know, rhino poaching in South Africa has spiked over the last 12 years, from 2 or 3 a year to 1,200 a year a few years back. Kruger National Park has lost, and they now stated it officially last month, they've lost just short of 70% of the rhino population in the last decade. So we are, and my investigations have been that there is a severe lack of traditional skills of tracking within the anti-poaching units. The poachers themselves are masters of the bush, and they are running rings around the anti-poaching personnel. So that is one obvious area where our students are deployed. And then the other is ecotourism. You alluded to Londolozi earlier. We need trackers to find animals for discerning travelers coming from around the world. And then the last one is, well, not the last one, but the other one is animal monitoring. So trackers working as assistants to scientists, collecting data in the field. The trackers get the scientists into the areas where the animals are that they're studying. They keep the scientists safe, and often they play a key role in local knowledge in the collection of data. And then there's a third area, which is what we call predator habituation. And I'm going to reserve my comments on that, because I'd like to revisit that later, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Oh yes, I want to hear about that. Yep. So, so you co-founded the Tracker Academy. Tell us what led you from, you were an early tracker to Londolozi. Tell us a little bit about Londolozi and how it was a pioneer also in ecotourism. I know that we talked with James Tyrrell several months ago, a ranger there, told us a bit. But for those who didn't hear that, we want to hear the backstory.
Yeah, so Londolozi started in the mid-1970s. It was the second ever commercial tourism game or safari lodge in South Africa, and one of the first handful in that time. And the Vati family, who own and continue to own Londolozi, were pioneers in their space. They were two young men who lost their father very, very young. They were still at school. Their mother was faced with selling the property, and they said, well, give us a year, give us a chance. And they went and they made it work. And today it's one of the top private reserves in the world. And it's famous for its leopards. And we don't know quite how or why, but somehow or another, some of the greatest wildlife trackers in the ecotourism industry were working at Londolozi. And Londolozi continues to spurn these really talented young men and now women as trackers. So they embarked on the process of calming the leopards, and within 15 years became famous for their leopards of Londolozi. And as you know, they were one of the first places that could guarantee if you went there, that you would see a leopard, which was very, very rare in those days. And I arrived there in 1995, and I was paired up with a man called Renius and Mhlongo. We had no choice in each other's appointment. I was a young 19-year-old game ranger, thought I knew it all. And Renius was born in what is today the heart of the Kruger National Park, in a mud hut underneath a big jackalberry tree. I've been to the place he was born. He's one of the original, probably one of the last surviving people that is raised on the original traditions of a Shangaan hunter-gatherer. His father and his family all came out of Mozambique. They lived in the Kruger as they moved eastwards, from the east slowly westwards through the park. And they're the last of the hunter-gatherers. And Renius and I were thrown together, and it was quite quick. It was quite obvious quite soon into our relationship what a genius he was. He has no schooling, no formal schooling, but he has great ecological literacy. Greater than anyone else I've ever met, including the PhD students who are doing their thesis. This man has an understanding of how things fit together that is so subtle and so unique. And he's the one person in my life who I continue to learn from, who continues to surprise me. And we've walked around in the bush now that was 1995, so it's 26 years the two of us have been together. I've taught him things from the Western culture perspective, and we're a team, and we will hopefully work together for a long time. So I learned my skills of tracking from Renius, and we love to track the leopards and so on, but he taught me, and over time we went and subjected ourselves to being qualified as certified trackers.
It's very interesting that the leopards want to be seen or allow themselves to be seen, because you say that you can successfully track a leopard, but if it doesn't want to be seen, you're not going to see it. You might find where it is, but you can't see it. So the leopards are so relaxed that they allow you in their lives. That's an interesting psychological development, isn't it, on the part of the leopard?
Yes, that's a good question, Laura, because the leopard represents the picture of a elusive, shy, retiring animal that strategy is to stay away from humans. There are parts of South Africa where leopards have been hunted for 300 years into complete oblivion. So to now turn around and say, oh, we want to be friends with you. We want you to reveal yourself, and we want to take pictures of you. That's not an easy thing to accomplish. And Londolozi did it. And it's unique because they those trackers formed a relationship with one particular female, the mother leopard, who in herself I think they were quite lucky in some ways. She was unusually relaxed. So and leopards are very, like all animals, they're very unique in terms of their personalities. She was a little bit calmer than the others. But and when they formed a relationship with her over the period of 15 years that they followed her, she had 9 litters of cubs. And you can imagine all those cubs grew up in the presence of vehicles and so on. So you had this family tree of leopards at Londolozi expanding out and recruiting the greater Western Kruger National Park. And today, leopard viewing at many game reserves is very good, not just Londolozi, but it all started there, very much so.
Kind of the 100th monkey effect. Yeah.
It was due to the refined, tenacious skills of tracking. There would not have been any relationship with those leopards had it not been for the wildlife trackers there.
Well, it's also the other wildlife, right? Because I look at the Londolozi blog, and they're the trackers, they're the lions sitting there lolling around like you're not there, and it's so interesting. And you also say that if it's a different color vehicle, if somebody stands up, if somebody does anything different, the lions or the animals suddenly go, now you're an enemy. Now we're on alert here. And it reminds me of, have you ever watched your dog greet somebody he knows, but they're wearing a hat or they're doing something different, and now he's spooked by them? They notice every little thing in their environment. That is also an interesting feature, because we process that. The animals go, that's different. Now I'm on alert. Can you explain that one?
Yeah, so I think that they can get conditioned to what they trust, and if there's something new makes itself available in the environment, they're just naturally untrusting. Humans have
so aware. Yeah,
we have a very poor relationship. It's a marker of how humans have interacted with nature over the last 200,000 years. We just haven't done a really good job at forming relationships with them. So it's just so entrenched in them to distrust us. So we've got to make the step in that regard.
Yeah. And one of your colleagues, my octopus teacher, Craig Foster, who did that, to befriend an octopus in the ocean.
Oh yeah.
That it shows you the capacity for us to befriend another species beyond cats and dogs. Right? It's, rather fascinating, our relationship with the wild. So back to what Rennie has taught you. So I was just wondering, because there aren't the nice imprints all the time that we saw in a mountain lion, that these clues are often very faint, that you are tracking on intuition perhaps, that you're tracking on your observation of what an animal is his habits, where he would logically go, oh, it's hot now, there's some shade, maybe he's over there in the shade. You're following the slightest clues. You're following your knowledge, as you mentioned, of the animal and its habits. What goes into tracking? What is this process like?
The short answer is a lot goes into tracking. It's complex, but I must say what I've run into a lot in the world is that tracking is mystical. And yes, it is mystical in some ways when it's done at such a high level of competence. But it is a practical skill. These are people that have put years and years and years. Renius, for close to 50 years, has been practicing following animals' trails, the most subtle trails. He has immersed himself in understanding the animal's behavior. He has slowly over years understood how animals interact with the landscape and how the landscape has an influence on their movements and behavior and motive and intentions. He has practiced seeing very, very obscure, subtle signs on the ground and bent grass and broken twigs and little scuff marks on the ground. He knows what undisturbed forest looks like. And if anything is out of place, he's onto it. And if it's in context, so the leopard track should be there, the scuff mark is of the right texture, and the animal was going in that direction, there's a high chance that he's right. And so he's constantly forming a hypothesis in his mind about what the animal is doing based on the evidence that he is observing. Now, the evidence isn't clear, like you've just said. It's when you track a leopard, if you track a leopard for 3 hours, you'll be lucky if you see 3 or 4 footprints that you can show to someone and say, there's a clear leopard track.
Wow.
Take a picture of that. It's just the vast majority of their prints, they are soft-footed animals. They tread very, very lightly, and you are following them, just obscurities most of the time. But you're also following the birds that are alarming. You're following the landscape. You're following where you believe and you're anticipating the animal's movements based on what you believe the animal is doing, or where it's based on its motive. So there's the technical competence side, and then there's the whole idea of, and Renius talks, he has a lovely saying. He says, to track a leopard successfully, you must put the leopard in your heart. And so basically what he's saying is get into the skin of the animal, start to understand, ask yourself, if I was a leopard here, what would I be doing? But I mean, I'm giving it to you in theoretically. I give a talk on how to trail animals at the beginning of the year with our tracker students. And for the next month, they still can't see anything. It's very much, it requires you to get out into the forest, into the bush, and start practicing it. It is a skill, like cricket or soccer or anything. And you get those who are really good at it. Renius is one of them. And some people just don't have an aptitude, and some do.
You know, when we say intuitive, maybe it's because we're picking up clues even without consciously understanding it. So we're seeing, we're understanding, we're putting it together. You know, it's interesting how much we can pick up in our environment
and maybe
and read. Go ahead.
And maybe on a side note, I kind of tongue-in-cheek in the introduction, but the point being that are we losing something by the fact that we're so dependent on technology now, where we don't develop those senses within ourselves? So not just tracking, but all of those central aspects of who we are as human beings, that more and more that we're using the phone and the calculator and the things all around us, that we don't have that capacity within ourselves.
We need to spend time in an environment to pick it up.
Why don't we go to the slides? I know, Alex, you have some fantastic slides and presentations for us, and I'd love to get into that, and it will tell the story even more deeply.
Okay, I can do that.
Oh, by the way, your logo is the hyena. You say that it is the best tracker in the animal kingdom. Why would that be?
Well, it's just a fact. They need to be able to follow scent trails in order to survive. They are, as you know, predominantly scavengers. But I mean, when I say predominantly, 55% of their food comes from scavenging. 45% comes from them making their own kills. But they have the physiologically in their sense of smell is way better than any other canid. Not that they're a canid; they're in an order of their own, completely, called Hyenidae. In fact, they are physiologically closer related to cats than they are dogs, but they obviously look like dogs. They're extraordinary caretakers of the next generation. It's quite interesting. They only give birth to 1 or 2 youngsters, and there's about an 80% chance of those 2 youngsters making it to adulthood. Whereas if you look at leopard, lion, wild dog, cheetah, there's only about a 20% chance of their youngsters making it to maturity. So what they do is they have these dens in big termite mounds or ant heaps that have been dug out by aardvark. They dine on the aardvark, and then they take over the residence, and they make dens there. That's where they keep their young, and they suckle their young for up to 2 years, and they don't expose their young to unnecessary danger. Again, contrary to how leopards and lions do it. So they're extraordinary caretakers of the next generation. So I think they share a philosophy of the Tracker Academies. Is our overarching mission is to ensure that these ancient skills of tracking endure for future generations. When the likes of Renius pass on or retire, that we are able to have the next generation of trackers coming up through the ranks. And I also just thought no one would ever want a hyena as their logo, and it would be quite memorable. And so somebody once said, "Which advertising agent did you use to create your logo?" There was a photograph I took, I outlined it, and I sent it off.
Excellent. Good backstory. Yeah.
Okay, so that's just a picture of Renius and I early. I was 19. Renius was 13 years older than me, so he would be 32 around there. with a group of guests. And this is what we did. We took guests out every day. We both immediately, Renius realized how much I liked the tracking. And so we spent a lot of time on foot with our guests, tracking rhinos and lions. And then we'd obviously get off the vehicle as well to go and track leopards for the guests. This is a nice close-up picture of Ren. I'm actually wearing the same shirt that he's wearing there. And the logo on your right is obviously the Tracker Academy. The one on the left is a project we ran in South America and Brazil at a place called Cayman Ecological Refuge, where we sent young trackers to go and track jaguars to habituate them for a lodge that was being developed in the Pantanal region of central Brazil. So that's Ren. He's a tall, big man with a deep voice, very charismatic, loves to tell stories. The ladies love him. He's a great mimic. He's a great mimic. And this is what I've noticed. All the great trackers are great mimics of each other. They can mimic bird calls and mimic their friends. They're great mimics. And that's part of the empathy that goes into being a great tracker. They have an ability to be compassionate and get into the skin of the other. Renius's father, Judas, was a tyrant of a man. Ren will tell you, Judas is now passed on, but Judas was physically abused, not sexually, but physically abused Renius and his brothers. He was a very, very harsh man. And again, having run the Tracker Academy for 12 years and had 200 young men and women come through our program, all of those who have been through mentally or emotional abuse as children turn out to be fantastic trackers. And it's just the level of awareness that is forced to be developed at that young age for just basic reasons of survival.
Survive, yeah.
Do you want me to play this video on Ren?
Go ahead. Yes.
Okay. He has a short 2-minute, 20-second video. It's sort of a tribute video. It was made when Renius turned 50. That was 8 years ago.
Renius sees what most do not. He was raised a hunter-gatherer and is amongst a handful of people who have mastered the art of animal tracking. The world's most elite trackers practice a skill long since forgotten. They read the signs. Observant, curious, aware. They are fully present in their surroundings. They put the animal in their heart. With keen intelligence and an active imagination, they work hard at refining their craft, turning what appears mysterious into the practical. Theirs is a deep connection with nature, based on mutual respect. Their legacy, to raise up the next generation of wildlife trackers, to build a community whose ancient skills serve modern conservation efforts.
So that's a little video on Ren. This is where he was born in the Greater Kruger National Park. he now lives in quite a nice home. And as I said, the Mhlongo family would spend time 5 or 6 years in a single place. They'd have a small group of cattle and goats. They'd grow vegetables and they'd hunt small game to survive. And as I say, every 4 or 5 years, just like all the hunter-gatherers did, they would move on when they felt they'd been there for long enough. And yeah, as I said, because Renius was such a good tracker, and I also I naturally enjoyed the process too, the two of us we really got immersed in this whole idea of trying to find leopards for our guests. Leopards are by far the most difficult animals to track. They tread lightly, as I alluded to earlier. They are highly elusive, shy animals. This is us looking for a den site where we believed a mother was keeping her 2 babies. This is a short video that talks about those original leopard trackers at Londolozi. Here we go.
When Renius and I worked at Londolozi Game Reserve in the mid-1990s, the leopard viewing was exceptional. We watched them drag kills up trees, and mothers tenderly nursing their young. On one occasion, we even walked with a wild leopard as she hunted, with no sign of aggression. Leopards symbolize intelligence and independence. There's an intangible sense of power about them. Their mysterious nature is tempting, and we found ourselves wanting to be closer. I had a reoccurring dream that I had made friends with a leopard, which I loved. It's the reason why people fly halfway around the world to see one. But the sightings weren't always like that. Dave Varty tells me that they were lucky to get even a glimpse of a leopard at Londolozi in the early 1970s. Monkeys alarming in a woodland, or the remains of an impala carcass hanging in a tree, was the only confirmation that they were there. Today, the Sabi Sands Game Reserve is synonymous with leopard sightings, a success story that has its origins largely at Londolozi. But how did this happen? Well, enticing signs of leopards prompted the Londolozi guides to go in search of the secret cat, and they had an advantage: their expert wildlife trackers. The initial tracking team consisted of Elmon Mhlongo, Phineas Mhlongo, and Kimbian Mnisi. A couple years later, Richard Sewela arrived, and in the early 1980s, Renius Mhlongo. They were the most successful leopard trackers of their time, the ones who tracked them until they found them. Richard Sewela spent an unbroken 42 years tracking leopards at Londolozi. His success rate was about 70% at the height of his career, an outstanding achievement if one considers the average of 22% for tracking and finding a leopard. Richard has successfully tracked more leopards than anyone else in Africa. These men crafted a relationship with one of the world's most elusive predators. It is a remarkable story. They were mavericks, achieving what no one else had ever done before. They developed trust with wild leopards so that ordinary people could view them, allowing us to share in their mystical lives for the very first time.
Oh, sorry, something happened.
Leopard
Sorry guys, I don't know what happened there.
people could view them, allowing us to share in their mystical lives for the very first time. Leopards leave subtle signs difficult to see. Their mercurial ways provide the ultimate challenge for the master tracker. The team was successful because of their refined tracking skills, intimate knowledge, and sheer tenacity. Respect for the animal was their main tenet. It's what made it all possible. Over 50 years, an extraordinary connection has emerged between the humans and leopards at Londolozi. A relationship bound in reverence, a partnership that allows for a vast sanctuary of wilderness to thrive, and which has inspired so much more. It's an example, too, of ancient tracking skills becoming relevant in modern conservation efforts. To us, the trackers are the heroes. They are legitimate co-creators of an entire industry. One wonders what other opportunities exist if we intentionally develop meaningful relationships with our animal kin. If we can do it with leopards, then surely it's possible with all nature.
Okay, so that's just a video as a tribute to that I made a couple of months ago to the original trackers at Londolozi that really had a far-reaching impact on the entire ecotourism industry, which is a huge employer in the communities, and of course contributes massively to the South African GDP, and it's the reason for great swathes of land under wildlife.
It's good to recognize them.
So those are just a couple of tracks. This is a leopard called the Tugwan female, who was a grumpy leopard. This is the daughter of the original mother leopard at Londolozi that Renius and I followed. Some days she'd be totally calm and relaxed, and other days she'd burst out of the bush at you. Renius, we started to have a conversation about how do we ensure that these tracking skills endure beyond people like Renius. And we started to track this leopard. This leopard on the screen now was called was called the Mungen female. You can see she's got one blue eye. She was spat in the face by a Mozambican spitting cobra, and she lost her vision. And shortly after we took this picture, she passed away. But this leopard, I write about it in the book. This was the one, Laura, where we got so close and we spent time with her, about an hour with her on foot. I don't know if you remember that story.
Yes. Yeah. Huh.
And she allowed us to get to within 20 meters of her. And we followed her while she hunted a small antelope called a duiker. And at one stage, she was stalking this duiker. Renius was on the left of her. I was on the right, slightly behind her. We were all crouched down, focused on this duiker. And it was this most bizarre situation where this wild leopard had accepted us into her hunt. And we, for some reason, had greater success rate tracking and finding the Mungen female than any other leopard. And I remember we'd be parked in our Land Rover with our guests. She'd come out of a thicket into a clearing, and she'd see us, and she would turn, and she'd come right past our vehicle, and she'd make this like chuffing sound, like this. And we didn't know what that was. And none of the senior guides knew about it. None of the researchers that I spoke about in the Kruger had ever heard a leopard do that. And later on, a tiger researcher told me that in tigers, tigers chuff to greet. And then recently, we found that clouded leopards do chuff to greet. But that's I heard it maybe 4 or 5 times. None of the other guides, and she would only do it for Renius and I. And it was the only leopard that I've ever heard that chuffed. And I don't know, maybe it was totally coincidence. I've never heard a leopard chuff since then.
But I think she was greeting you. I think she was saying, "Hi, friend, hello." Yeah.
It may sound far-fetched, but that's the only explanation I can give. And she was called the Mungen. Mungen is a Shangaan word, means aloe, because the core of her territory was in an area with these beautiful aloes. And that's why we called her the Mungen. She was a wonderful, wonderful, beautiful leopard. So we started to have a conversation about how do we ensure that these skills continue. And that's when we resigned from our jobs at Londolozi, and we went into the chilly wind of unemployment, and we traveled around the world. We came to the US. We funded ourselves by teaching tracking. We took courses in Yellowstone and in California and on the East Coast and Vermont, to fund ourselves to go and do presentations to try and find somebody who would donate or invest or fund a project to ensure that the next generations and we were totally unsuccessful. And back on the beach in Plettenberg Bay, the hometown where I'd come from, we'd basically been on the road a year. We traveled the UK, the US, Australia. We hadn't raised a dime. And on the beach in Plettenberg Bay, my hometown, I meet the daughter of the wealthiest family in South Africa. And I tell her my sad story, and the rest is history. The Tracker Academy is an NGO. As you've seen, we have three bases in South Africa. The Samara is in the Karoo, which is a semi-desert area. Swalu is in the Kalahari, and Londolozi, our old stomping ground, in the Kruger National Park. We train 24 young men and women a year over a 1-year full-time, formally accredited tracker training program. And we're the only tracker training school in the world that enjoys formal education accreditation by the Department of Education, proving that this is a legitimate skill and it has legitimate relevance in modern conservation efforts, even though it's an ancient, mostly forgotten practice or craft. We move our students around between those three areas because they represent the three most diverse biomes in Southern Africa. And since 2010, we've trained just short of 200 professional trackers, men and women, of which 89% are in permanent conservation jobs, all of whom, before they came to Tracker Academy, were unemployed, many without hope, and many who could have followed a life of crime or worse, are now professional trackers working in the conservation industry, protecting a rhino, and so on. This is a short video on the Tracker Academy, which is a short video that gives you
There are
visual.
very few master trackers left in Africa. We have lost 90% of the indigenous tracking skills over the last 30 or 40 years. We always had a very intense desire to start something that took these wonderful, unique skills and transferred them into people who didn't have an opportunity for education and who could use these skills in conservation around Africa.
The art of trekking is dying. My dream is to become a master trekker one day.
The Tracker Academy course is 1 year. The first 6-month semester is situated at the Karoo base, Samara Game Reserve, where the students learn the semi-desert biome. They then shift to Londolozi Game Reserve, where they get an opportunity to learn the more traditional bushveld biome.
So you learn different things. You start from the scratch, you go to a trekking school.
Tracking is measurable, it's objective. You can teach it, you can train it, and you can evaluate it.
The skills that I've been taught, how to follow a wild animal, it's amazing.
This is a two rhino dung, yeah? You see, and then also another one there. Okay, this dung is very fish. Let's follow. Okay.
The skills that I got from Tracker Academy, I will be conserving our rhino. Every day when I go out in the bush, I learn different things.
I can identify almost everything in the tracks.
Now I have a lot of skill. I want to go back my home to show the people that I'm a tracker.
The trekking course that I went to is not about teaching you tracks and leave you like that. They also help you get a job. You got knowledge and you get employed, and then you bring something back home, and by doing so you also help your relatives, your family.
Almost 100% of our tracker graduates are finding permanent gainful employment.
My job will change my life and also my family. I will try to help them.
You see people go through a complete metamorphosis to a place where they are more powerful and they can make a massive contribution, not only to conservation, but to South Africa and to Africa as a whole.
I can even track my life. I know where I come from, and I know where I'm going. Teachers in the Tracker Academy not only teach trekking, they also teach you how to live in life.
From the beginning, I was blank, but they write something in that blank pages, and I see a good picture about myself.
This is important for many people. This is the great beginning.
My life, as I'm talking now, has changed completely.
All right.
Very
Wow.
nice.
Any questions so far?
Paul?
No, you go first.
I think it's so important to give back to these communities their knowledge and to make it viable and productive and give them a new life in that way. So congratulations.
In turning it back around, where a skill set that may have been used for hunting purposes is now being used for the preservation.
Yeah.
And so taking a skill set and turning it on its head and using it for the protection and moving
Let
forward.
tourists hunt with cameras
for future
now.
generations. Yeah, they can shoot with cameras. Right.
Yes, no, that's right. And the two ladies are two of our lady students from 2 years back. The lady
I'm
on
glad
the
to
left,
see some women in there. Yeah.
Yes. No, well, this is it. That's why I included this purposely. Tracking is gender neutral, as they say. And anyone can learn to track. Anyone who has the aptitude, who's prepared to combine a sense of detail with a greater environment and who enjoys nature can learn to track. The lady on the left is a daughter of a bushman tracker, and she lives in a very rural, remote village in northwestern Botswana. And the lady on the right is a South African. Actually, the lady on the right, although she doesn't come from a bushman community, was actually the top tracker in her respective group. Top student. Yeah.
You said there's only about 4 or 5 traditional Bushman trackers left. Did you go to them and say, work with them as well? Did they have additional knowledge and techniques and observations? Or because they go back, way back. You want to go back to, yeah.
Yeah, no, they go back thousands of years. And there are Bushman communities in South Africa, Namibia, and Botswana. There are very few unfortunately, alcohol has ruined a lot of these communities. But there are still Bushman trackers who are still hunting, not with the frequency that they used to, and are using those skills for their survival. But it's very rare. A lot of them are on government kind of handouts. Some of them are hunting with dogs. But we're working with them, and what we're doing is we also send trainers like Renius into these Bushman communities where they can get assessed and get formal certification for their skills so that they can be recognized as trackers, so they can get jobs and so on.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. So broadly speaking, the two components of tracking, if I had to talk very broadly, are the track and sign and what we call trailing. The track and sign is the study of all animals' footprints. Any animal that comes to the ground, that touches the ground, that footprint or that mark we're interested in, and that forms part of the track and sign component. From insects to birds to antelope to elephants. This is a picture of a few of our students studying an owl's track. Again, we want to know what type of owl they are. We document every single bird that comes to the ground. We draw, photograph, and record their tracks, and we teach those. And if tracking were a language, this component would very much be akin to the alphabet, to the ABC. The trailing, on the other hand, is the following of an animal's footprint, like a lion or a rhino, until you eventually find it. And that requires a totally different skill. This requires a very rational, analytical approach. And I've actually interestingly found that people that have had a Western education usually do quite well in the front end on the track and sign, because many of us played with, we were taught shapes and we played with puzzles and we were taught to measure and we were given an analytical slant to our early education, whereas a lot of rural Africans don't have the advantage of Western education, and they do better on the trailing. And it takes us, the Westerners, longer to get good at the trailing, far longer. So that's quite interesting. And the trailing it requires a totally different skill. You can be really good at identifying animals' tracks, but really poor at following them because they're two totally different disciplines. So that's just an image of a couple of guys looking at a track. This is a hare's track here. Some of a hare that's bounded down the road in the Kalahari, and you can see there's also a bird that has moved along the top, a francolin, a ground bird that's moved along there too. This is a student of ours looking at a tortoise track in some mud. It came looking for water. Obviously, we want the students to be able to identify the tracks, but also interpret them. So they have to be able to tell male from female. In this image, actually, the female as labeled is on the left, and the male's on the right. So what we did here, this was in a final evaluation. We asked the tracker students 3 questions. We asked them, tell us, the 2 questions. Tell us male from female. Tell us how fast they're moving, and thirdly, what they may have been doing. And what had actually happened here, that lioness, let me see if I can annotate. Let me get my spotlight out here. Yeah. Can you see the spotlight?
Yep.
Okay, so that's the female's hind foot that is partially superimposed on top of the front foot. The front foot is here. The hind foot is landed partially on top of the front foot. That gait of the hind foot landing partially on top of the front foot is indicative of a medium pace. That lioness was moving at a normal pace. This lion, the male lion on the other hand, this is his front foot. And yeah, exactly. And his hind foot is landed a good distance in front. And so that's indicating that he's moving faster. So he did not walk with that lioness. The lioness passed by first. There were actually 3 of them. They killed a zebra, and the male lion heard it, and he came in later, stole the zebra, and pretty much ate the whole carcass and left them hungry. So you can tell a lot about what animals are doing just by their gaits, just by one single snapshot of 4 footprints like this. A whole lot of information can be gleaned, and we teach our students how to do that, how to identify, and how to, more importantly, interpret all the signs that they see.
Perfect.
This is Renius teaching some field rangers in Malawi. So some of these guys have worked for many, many years as field rangers or anti-poaching personnel, but they've never really looked on the ground and they don't know about the myriad of information that they just walk over all day. They get trained well in AK-47, the use of these machine guns and military kind of tactics and so on. But the managers in these conservation NGOs forget that the fundamentals of any good operative is basic tracking skills, at least basic tracking skills. And we've done this kind of work in the beginning. I used to get so surprised. I'm no longer surprised by personnel that have been working in the bush for many years, and they don't really know how to track. This is the trailing. On the other hand, this is a young student who's following a black rhino trail here, and all our students get assessed every single month in both the trailing component as well as the track and sign. Their scores get recorded, and we track their progress right throughout the year. Here's a group of senior trackers following a leopard. As you can imagine, a leopard is not easy. This is Renius and I following a leopard here as well. For me, the following is the more interesting of the 2. That's just my personal favorite.
Yeah.
Following requires a very creative you can call it intuitive, pattern forming or pattern recognition, holistic kind of approach. You've got to be comfortable in the detail, but prepared to also get out of the detail and see the detail within the greater context of the landscape. Yeah. This is a short video that it's a 2-minute video of us tracking a rhino. It'll just give your audience, Laura, an understanding of like what kind of signs we look at.
Yeah.
You are asking me what sort of signs do we look at when we track something. Well, here's a video that highlights some of those signs. We went tracking rhino this day. Here we go.
Tracks from this morning of a rhino bull, which we're going to follow. It's 10 to 6 now. We'll see how long it takes us. Beautiful fresh tracks. You can see the earth and the wet leaf from where the rhino has sprayed, marking his territory. Yeah, the rhino's been chewing. Scuffed a bit of mud on this log. We've been going just over 3 hours now. Group is starting to tire a little bit. Renius though, ever-present energy. See where the rhino is rubbed here up against this branch. The ability to recognize and interpret the smallest detail is absolutely key. Oxpecker's calling, showing it be close by. Well done, guys. Hey, finally got them.
An abundance of evidence if you knew where to look. Wow.
So that's then what we did was we when we started Tracker Academy in 2010, there was no curriculum, there was no blueprint, no textbooks that we had to start from scratch, and we wrote our own textbook called the Tracker Manual, which in 2017 we made available to the public as a field guide, which you can buy on Amazon. Obviously, it not going to help you in the US, but in the front there are essays on the trailing, on how to identify tracks and so on, and on traditional tracking skills that would be helpful to you. But it's details on how to identify animals' tracks in Southern Africa, as well as what to look for when you're trailing the big animals like lion and leopard and rhino. So that's the Tracker Manual. Then I think I said at the beginning that I wanted to talk a little bit about the predator habituation.
Yes.
Yeah. And some of the projects that our Tracker students, although our school is based in South Africa, we have projects all over the place. We've got projects in Botswana, Malawi, Rwanda. We've got the project in Brazil. We are developing a project in Chile, one in Australia. And this was a project of a Tracker student of ours, or graduate of ours correctly, who monitored aardvark, and he did such a fantastic job. He formed a relationship with the aardvark, and he collected data on these aardvark for 2 years. And this was just a classic example of the value that traditional skills of tracking can bring conservation. Now, if you had darted that aardvark and put a microchip in it, you may have got some evidence on its movements and that. But Given was able to be with the aardvark, and he got close to it by tracking it, and every single day finding it, and eventually it got used to his presence. And he collected insane data on these aardvark.
Well, like Jane Goodall and chimpanzees and Dian Fossey
Yes.
and mountain gorillas, yeah.
Exactly the same. Yeah. This is a graduate who went into the anti-poaching industry. These are just samples of kind of some of the stories. And he was further trained to become a dog handler. And he is one of the most feared anti-poaching personnel in the Greater Kruger National Park. He's a good tracker in his own right, with his dog called Assegai, which means spear in Zulu. And his dog is a trained tracker dog as well. So you can imagine you've got no chance of getting away from this pair if you're a poacher. Then I mentioned the predator habituation. This is just a nice example of how relaxed. This is a mating pair of leopards at Londolozi. As you saw earlier, how important the trackers were in their role in in calming these very shy animals. What we did was we took the methodology that Renius and his brothers started at Londolozi in the 70s and 80s, and we teach that to our Tracker Academy students. And we teach them how to track these animals and how to form relationships with them. And an unintended consequence of Tracker Academy's work has been these ex situ projects where we send out our graduates to big remote areas where there's some investor who wants to build a fancy lodge, and we help them to settle the local predators, lions, leopards, and in some cases, jaguars and pumas. And it's been, we are inundated with requests now from all over the world to send our trackers to go and do this. We recently had a request from a place in China to track and habituate panda bears. Now, I turned that down because I wasn't sure of the legitimacy of that. Brazil, the Pantanal region is, as you can see, in the heart of Brazil. It looks very similar, and I'm sure many of the people on this call will be familiar, but it looks very similar in many ways to the Okavango Delta of Botswana here in Southern Africa. We went over there, this Renius and I, with a giant anteater to go and establish whether it was possible to track and find jaguars. And it was possible. And we sent these two young men, Andrea and Richard, that had never been outside of their home villages, let alone Johannesburg, let alone flying halfway across the world to Sao Paulo. And they spent 6 months there, and they tracked the jaguars every single day. And at that time, the owner of the ranch told me that about 5% of his guests staying in his lodge saw a jaguar. Last year Christmas, he sent me a Christmas card saying, since we started our project there, over 70% of his guests are seeing jaguars as a result of our trackers' efforts there. And this is a picture of one of the jaguars that was taken. And that was just through tracking, that just old school traditional skills of tracking. We formed a relationship with these jaguars, and now that lodge is able to market itself as a reliable place to go and see jaguars. And it's a rare example of South Africa exporting a skill for the benefit of international conservation.
Yep. How similar are jaguars to leopards? I mean, they're in very different environments.
Yes, they've got similar traits. They're somewhere between a lion and a leopard. They both, in terms of size, their physiological appearance, obviously they're spotted like a leopard, but a male jaguar is almost as big as a lioness. They're not quite as aloof and as solitary as a leopard are. You do see them moving in groups, but they don't move around in big prides like lions do. And we found once you get onto their trail and you start to get them regularly, they actually settle quite quickly. And they can be dangerous, like lions. They're definitely more dangerous than leopards, I would imagine, just through their sheer size.
Right.
This is another project in Chile that we ran. We started the project there just before COVID, so we had to suspend it. Where Renius successfully tracked a puma, and that had never been done before. Where there's a picture of us with a couple of pumas, 3 mother and 2 cubs. I think you call them mountain lions. In the background.
We call them mountain lions or cougars.
Yeah. So that's a cool project. There's another project we're studying tracks that are 120,000 years old, fossilized tracks.
Oh my Lord! Wow.
This was an example where that's actually a crocodile's front foot track. And if you don't believe me, I don't mind. It's okay, but it is.
No, I believe you. It's just fascinating. Wow.
And it was the paper, we co-authored a paper that was published in the South African Journal of Science, which proved that there were crocodiles in the South Cape Coast, and they'd never known that there were ever crocodiles in that region.
Because you could recognize the tracks. Yeah.
Yes. So it's again just another example of tracking skills being made relevant. I think that's the book that you've just read. changing a leopard's spots, Laura.
Yes, it was fun, very autobiographical. And I appreciate the lessons that you impart from tracking to life itself and the mental game. I want to talk about that in a bit, but just the mental interior game of facing doubt, of not knowing, and what tracking can bring you in life, or those skills.
Yes. No, and we can get into that now if you want to.
Well, go ahead with your slideshow, and then
Okay, so I'm almost done. So so this is what this is about. Is so what we've done. I've thought a lot about the tracking process and how it is linked to life and also to business. And it's just so uncanny how close or how much one can learn from these ancient skills. When, as you mentioned right at the beginning of the presentation, Laura, the hunter-gatherers for 190,000 years, it is the most successful lifestyle strategy of modern man. The chances that we're going to live another 190,000 years under our current lifestyle strategy are pretty slim, I would say.
Doubtful,
and gatherers did something right. They did something right.
Yes.
And key to their strategy, their success was tracking. And when a tracker follows a leopard or a lion, that animal is wild and it cannot be controlled. And the environment over which it moves, again, is beyond the influence of the tracker. So the tracker has to engage in a process that gives him the best chances of success. And having now spent 25 years with master trackers all over the world, I've come up with a model, a pathway that most trackers use. And it's not set in stone, but there are these 5 elements that trackers that make use of. And I'm going to run you through that. And most importantly, and you'll soon see that tracking is very much about a mentality, a certain mindset. As you correctly said at the beginning of the session, Laura, we are all born to track, and that is so true. And I really believe that. And we do spend too much time with our heads buried in technology, and we've forgotten to notice. We've forgotten to be still. We're not noticing the alarm calls around us. And those alarm calls come in many different forms, you know. It might be a niggling feeling of apprehension. It might be something somebody says to it. It might be a physical, a hooting alarm call. It might be, if we're leading a business team, it might be a lack of a drop in engagement by our staff. It might be the entry of a competitor. There are these alarm calls that are around us all the time. And what I know about trackers is that their success in staying safe in the bush and being able to find the thing that they're tracking, they are tuned in completely to the alarm calls. There is not a single alarm call that will go unnoticed. And even if it's not relevant right then, they remember it, and it gets stored, and they are constantly forming a mental picture about what's happening around them by listening to these alarm calls. Constantly, they know what's happening just without having to see the animals necessarily. And so what you'll see on the far left there, I'm going to link this now to life, and I'm going to link it a little bit to business, but the tracking process assumes you know what you're tracking. And people tell me, business coaches tell me that a lot of people actually don't know what they're tracking in life. But I'm not going to get into that because I'm not a business coach. I'm just a tracker. But this process assumes you actually know what you're going after. And so if you don't know what you're going after, then this is probably not going to help you.
Define it first, right?
But I'm assuming everyone has a vague idea of what they're after in life, both personally and professionally. The first phase is the actual track phase. You've got to get out there into the best areas of opportunity. The tracker wants to find the freshest track that's going to give him the best chances of success. You want the best chances of return on energy. He gets into the areas of greatest opportunity. He's not going to go and track a leopard where, if he's looking for a leopard, he's not going to go and track one in an area he's never seen leopards before, or in an area where it's stony ground and you can't see any of its evidence. Trackers go out early when the conditions are best for tracking, and this is a very active phase of the process. It's getting out there early and getting into the areas of greatest opportunity and finding the freshest track. Because if you get onto the wrong track, it can have far-reaching consequences, especially as a tracker. You follow the wrong track, an old track, or a track of the wrong animal, you can be going many, many hours through the hot sun and have very little to show for it.
Same like our life path even.
Right, applies perfectly. Yeah.
The next phase, the next component within the track phase is now let's assume you've now found your track. You found what you think is the right track. Now you start to move down the trail. And in the initial phases of that trailing effort is to evaluate the information. Trackers are zooming in here now, and they want to know, is it a lioness? Is it a lion? How fresh is it? How fast is it moving? What direction is it going in? This phase now, they want to now make sure that they are going to commit to this trail. It's the phase to analyze. It's a very rational part of the process, and this is when they're going to make their final decision. Are they going to commit to this particular trail? The mindset here is one, as I alluded to earlier, of being highly active, being open to any eventuality, being highly curious, but also being discerning, not just going for the first track that presents itself. And this is where I see younger or average trackers, this is the trap, TRAPS, that they fall into, is a bias, what we call a bias for action, is wanting to get onto the first track and just follow. Renius will pass up 3 or 4 different leopard tracks before he commits to following the right one, because he wants the right one, the one that's going to give him the best chances of success. Younger trackers and people who just want to be seen to be tracking will just start without doing the upfront work. So that's the mindset. Then, now assuming we've evaluated the track, it's looking good. Now we're starting to follow. Now we're getting momentum down. We're following footprint by footprint. We're making headway now down the trail, following this trail of evidence. At some point, you can never, let me stop before I say that, you can never outwalk or outpace a lion or a leopard. The tracker has to, at some point, find ingenious ways to speed up in order to close the gap, to leapfrog ahead. And they do that by embracing creativity. They become innovative. They make use of the environment to help them. And they ask themselves 3 questions, 3 golden questions, which I talk of. And these are not conscious questions that they literally take out their notebook and say, what is this and what is that? These are very subliminal questions that they ask themselves that we've kind of isolated over time. And there they are down bottom left. First is, what are the tracks saying? So you've got a lioness heading south. Tracks are fresh. She's moving very quickly. The second question is, how is the landscape having an influence on that animal? Is there a water hole up ahead that may draw the lioness in that direction? Is there a clearing full of antelope that may draw the lion in that direction? How is the landscape having an influence on this animal's movement? And then thirdly, what is the animal doing? By answering 1 and 2, you should be able to answer 3. What is the animal's motive? What's its intention? Where is it going? What's it doing? And the answer to those 3 questions, the combined answer to those 3 questions, help you to close the gap. The mindset there has to be one of being totally agile, not engaging in dogma about what you think the animal is, what you think the animal is doing based on the last time you tracked it. You have to be creative. You have to be open to all eventualities. It's a very holistic approach. The traps there are, some trackers go too fast. They get overconfident. They think, the lioness has always gone to that waterhole. That's where it's going. And then they lose track. So the traps are haste, overconfidence, hindsight, what we call hindsight bias. Those are the things that get you in the way of successfully closing the gap. And if you can do 1, 2, and 3 well enough or long enough, you'll eventually have an encounter. And the encounter is important because the tracker has to be highly vigilant. The encounter is important because when the tracker finds that lion or leopard, he wants to do it in a way that is safe, respectful, that doesn't elicit an aggressive response by the animal or a frightened response where it runs off. Both outcomes you don't want. The encounter is all about building the relationship, nurturing the relationship, setting up a situation for future tracking success. You want that encounter to go down well, so that animal, if it does notice you are there, has a good experience with you on foot. And so that the next time you track it, it's going to reveal itself instead of hiding, or it's going to reveal itself instead of charging at you. And again, the mindset here is one of safety, trust, obviously gratitude for having had the tracking process and having had the encounter. The traps here are ego, hubris, disrespect. You get cavalier trackers who think they're good enough, they can track and find anything. They become disrespectful upon their encounter, and that doesn't bode well for future tracking success. The last element, I said there were 5 elements. The last is losing the track, losing the trail. This is totally part of the tracking process. There's never an instance where you successfully track and find anything that you don't at some point lose track. And this is true in life, or tracking a lion, or tracking a customer, or tracking a project, tracking anything you like. At some point, you're going to go off track. The master trackers have 2 very simple ways of dealing with a lost trail. Number 1, they'll go back. If they lose a track, they'll go back to their last confirmed piece of hard evidence where they knew they were on track, and go back and start again, and go slowly and be extra careful for the detail until they're through the difficult area, and then follow again. That's one way of dealing with the lost track. The other way is engaging in this idea of closing the gap, where the tracker says, I've been tracking this, I've lost the trail, but I've got a good sense of I've been on the trail for a long time, so I've got a good sense of where it's going, or what the animal's doing, and I'm going to leapfrog ahead. I'm going to predict and go up ahead and see if I can cut the track up front somewhere and anticipate. Now, what's important here is the mindsets and the traps in this losing. When you track a leopard or a lion or a rhino, you're constantly losing the trail. You follow for 100 yards, you lose the trail for 20 yards. Then you pick it up again. You follow for 200 yards, you lose the trail for 50 yards. You pick it up again, and it's a constant process of finding and losing and finding and losing. And as you move down the path of the animal, you're gaining more evidence, like an investigator. You're constantly gathering information, gathering evidence that's building this hypothesis in your mind of what the animal is doing and how close you're getting to it. When you lose the trail, the best trackers in the world are immediately they're honest about, I've lost the trail. They're humble enough to say, I'm confronting the brutal facts here. I have lost track. Doesn't matter that I'm a master tracker. I'm off track. I don't know where this animal has gone. They are humble and courageous enough to say that. Yet they are tenacious enough to not allow that to worry them. They back their ability to get back on track. And I see so many trackers, I see so many people in businesses who are pretending to track. They are off track. They have lost the trail, and they're pretending to go on. They don't have the courage or the humility or the honesty to say, guys, I'm lost. On the traps, there's a denial there. There's dogma. There's despair. I can't do this. It's too hard. The masters never do that. They don't deny and they don't despair when they're off track. And that, Laura and Paul, is the tracking success pathway. And as I'm sure you've realized by now, it's a discussion in mindsets, and it's a model that can be applied to tracking anything. Yeah, never mind a lion.
Fundamental.
That was fascinating. That was so insightful. That, oh boy.
I mean, and you can apply it to yourself in your life, and those times when you weren't honest with yourself, that you're going down the wrong path, you're tracking improperly.
Or following the easy answers.
And not having the tenacity to continue, and living in denial. Yeah, all those things.
Yeah, we've been there, done that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yes. Exactly right. Quite right. So that's the end of my my slide deck. Laura.
Okay.
So,
thank you.
I can if I've got a PDF of this. If anyone's interested, I can send it to you after the.
Oh, good. Yes.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
So
Do you want to turn off your
slide? Yeah, there he
slides?
is.
Yeah. Well, one thing I'd like to do is show you the mountain lion tracks, because you were tracking mountain lions, you were tracking grizzlies, you've tracked kangaroos and caiman and all sorts of animals. But I really have to ask you about these mountain lions.
Okay, well, let me pull up the slide, Laura, and then we get to the right top of the slide. Not yet. It's not on the screen yet. Give
There
me
we
a
go.
moment.
So this is what we photographed when we came back to our Cuyamonga Institute facilities in New Mexico, the remote northern edge of Santa Fe, after a winter away. And we're looking at these tracks and then show where we found them. See, look at the baby track and then the mama track, I think.
Oh, just a different
size, yeah,
different
side by side. And do you have and here they are, right down our pathways.
Yeah.
So we're looking at that going, oh, who's been here? It was thrilling. It was thrilling.
Yeah.
So right close to the buildings, and
So
and pretty fresh tracks. And then I went online and I said, like you would advise, okay, whose tracks are these? And could draw the X through them, the mountain lion, and they were big, and I measured them and sent them off to a wildlife ranger. And he said, oh yeah, mountain lions, they'll pass through. Probably aren't there any longer.
We have a lot of coyote, commonly tracks, but mountain lion was not as common so close to the buildings. That was quite amazing.
Yeah, that was interesting.
I have one picture from the Santa Fe newspaper just showing mountain lion enjoying a carcass meal.
We didn't see this, and we did not take
this.
This
is not on our land, but this is in Santa Fe. But it was just interesting to show.
And the advice, of course, being do not run. If you see a mountain lion, or if you think that they're there, don't run. Do you want to go back off screen now? So look at that, just close to our buildings. So the predators like you to run. They are conditioned for chasing prey, right? So you run and you trigger that response in them. They can knock you down, bite your throat, you're gone.
Yeah.
So pretty dangerous.
They fear your courage.
They say that again?
They fear your courage.
They fear your courage.
So show up. And because they're looking up to their safety, they don't want to get themselves, they don't have a hospital to go to, they don't want to get injured, because that would severely compromise their ability for the next kill. So,
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
So when you were hunting grizzlies in Yellowstone and going to these environments, the first thing you did was equip yourself with, what are the tracks? What am I looking for?
Well, I must tell you an interesting story. The first time we ever went, we had a group of 10 American students who were meeting us in Yellowstone to go and teach them how to track grizzlies. And the idea was we would arrive 2 or 3 days before just to get acclimatized. And we had all kinds of travel problems, and we ended up arriving on the same day as our students. And the next morning we went out. We stopped the vehicle and we got off and we walked down the path, and one of the American students says, "Hey, Alex, here's a bear track." And the first time I'd ever seen a bear track was when my student showed it to me. I hadn't even seen a bear, let alone its track. And Renius and I spent, that was the hardest few hours of our tracking history and lives, by trying to follow those bears. And we were really, we struggled, we were really challenged. And and I actually felt like a complete charlatan, that I'd taken money from these people and couldn't teach them anything. But over the days, we got a bit better, and we started to realize which berry bushes they were feeding on. We realized that when they go over a fallen tree, They don't just go over it, they go onto it and then they turn left or right and they walk along the tree, obviously looking for, grubs.
Grubs. Yeah.
Yes, yes. We found their hairs, they like to rub up on trees. So we started to find the sign, although the principles of tracking are the same, irrespective of whether you're tracking a lion, a rhino, a human, or a bear. There is that 80-20 rule where you need to know how that bear behaves, and some of the sign that is unique to it before you can be competent.
So the fundamentals of tracking apply. It's just a matter of now you have to use the same knowledge base of tracking, but it's a different species, a different animal, a different environment, but it applies.
And know its tracks, right? Because you can't tell from looking at an animal what its tracks, what its toes, what it's going to look
and
like.
Some of those subtle senses, like a hair on a branch, a broken twig, those kinds of things. I mean, that would be quite different in a new environment for you geographically. But those are the things that, through the training and the knowledge you have, coming from your home, you're able to apply. You learn it quickly.
Well, when we were in Uluru in Australia, and you do this whole walk around the 6 miles around Uluru, Ayers Rock, and they show you the different caves. We had a guide, and they're showing us the different caves. There was the children's cave, and you peer in, and there it looks like a blackboard because the cave wall was so vertical and straight, and there were animal tracks all over it. And I thought, of course, you would teach the children what these animal tracks look like. You would be tutoring them. This would be one of the first lessons if you were a child growing up in that environment. And I thought it was so beautiful. Here was your blackboard. Here was your schoolroom. Here were all the different animal tracks. It was so readily evident that this is what had taken place here. So
that's quite right. And tracking evolved on parts of the planet where tracking where the conditions are conducive to tracking. So Uluru is fantastic. You've got that red soft sand all around there in that area. The same for the Kalahari. It's also a very similar red sand. So there's no doubt that's why trackers developed tracking skills, because the tracking conditions were just so perfect. If you go to the Amazon, it's far more difficult to track there. There were different types of hunter-gatherers. Hunter-gatherers use different techniques. They didn't track like we track. And so the conditions that are conducive to tracking, it plays a huge role in whether you're going to get masters in that area or not.
Well, there was a fascinating story that was told by the guide when we went around, and there was a pool. And of course we think, oh, water. Oh, let's go swimming, right? This is what we would think in modern times. And she said, no, they protected this pool. There was taboos about use of this pool. And even the women going around, you can see the track where they would go very quietly around the edge of it, not to leave their scent, not to leave their track for the kangaroos to look at, to fetch water and then go out. And they said that when the kangaroos would come in, a herd of kangaroos to drink, the hunter would very carefully follow and let the kangaroos get there. The last kangaroo, he would quietly bag and take away without disturbing the other kangaroos, so that then they would come out again, and they would keep coming to that water hole, not knowing that humans were there to grab one at a time. And so developing that kind of a relationship with the wildlife, not to spook it, to keep it coming where you knew it was going to be, for it to come to you. I mean, it was very clever strategy and use of the environment. I was fascinated by that story in terms of how the taboos were set up so that humans didn't destroy an easy
sustenance,
easy hunting. Nice when the prey comes to you. So
yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Well, I'm going to open it up for questions. If anyone has any, you can raise your hand using the chat button and raise your hand, or put some questions into the chat room if you'd like, one way or the other, just so that you have an opportunity to talk to Alex.
Okay, and also I want to say how 2 comments while you're getting calls, how readily the animals also communicate in their environment. You talk about a bird that alarmed a different alarm for a lion, a different alarm for a leopard. Not just a general alarm, but specific alarms, which Renius knew how to interpret, so he knew it was a lion or a leopard ahead. That is rather fascinating, that they had calls that would decipher what animal it was to that degree, right?
Yes, and we didn't know that. Everyone just thought it was an alarm call, and then Renier started to say, no, but it's alarming at a mongoose, or it's alarming at a snake or a leopard. And the news got out that this tracker could do this, and an ornithological professor came and spent a week with Renius and recorded Renius's, and they also then would follow up to try and verify whether Renius was right or wrong. And he was right in just short of 70% of the time. He was right. Yeah.
Boy. And how much osmosis is a technique of learning? You say that you learned a lot by osmosis, watching Renius. You observe, and that's how even a cub would learn from its mother, right? Observe. And how they are territorial, we're territorial. What do? We set up fences all around our territory, and the animals set up their scent marks to define their territory. We are so much part of the animal kingdom, and we forget that. So I think that this is helping us remind us just who we are in the grand ecosystem, in the web of life. We're right there. We need to behave according to...
Sometimes it's not so appropriate. When both my girls were born in the bush, and they spent their first few years in the bush, and when we moved to the town, one of the first things they did was climb over the wall and go into the neighbor's garden. They didn't think there was anything wrong with that. It wasn't so well received.
Well, I remember an interview on radio with Kobe Kruger, no relation to Kruger National Park, but her husband was a ranger there back in the day, and she talked about her girls growing up in the bush and how comfortable they felt with it because they could read the signs, because they understood who was about. They understood the signs of safety and danger. They could read their environment and felt safe in it. And then they moved to Johannesburg, and they were put in school there. And then one of the exercises was the teacher said, draw what you're afraid of. They're drawing the city. And the kids that grew up in the city are drawing the bush. And it was really interesting how familiar we get with our environment and how we learn to read it. And there are stories of anthropologists talking to members of a tribe in a dense jungle like the Amazon, and how terrified they are of open spaces, right? Because they felt the comfort of their environment. It's so interesting too. So I think part of tracking and what the skill set you're talking about, tracking our environment, if we learn these skill sets, we can walk into various environments and begin to feel comfortable. We can start to read the signs. So I know that was one of my life lessons from my father. Be comfortable, learn how to navigate any social environment that we put you in, any kind of environment. It's a good life lesson to employ. How do you teach your girls? You have two beautiful girls. What kind of life skills are you teaching them, parlayed from what you do to children?
I think curiosity is just the one of the signature key traits, personality traits of some of these master trackers. We teach our girls to be curious, to be asking questions, and not to assume anything is right, and not to just allow people to tell them things, and then they must question everything. And trackers, the master trackers question. They're curious, and they've got pretty good memories, and they're empathetic people. So it's always about the other. It's not you. They're the most humble people. Trackers are not. The masters are not good people. They don't communicate so well because they're like artists. They like to be on their own. But they know that in order to successfully track and find something, they've got to get into the skin of the other. And they've got the more effective they are at tracking lion, let me say it the other way, the better they're going to track is by improving their knowledge on the subtleties of lion behavior. The more knowledgeable they can become on that which they are pursuing, the more effective they're going to be as a tracker. So that is true for anything you're going after in life. A tracker will tell you, well, what does that thing look like, and what's its intention, where and how you're going to get there, and what evidence is it leaving, and what's its detail, and how's it interacting with its environment, and that's how trackers work out. They're investigators. They're somewhere between an artist, an investigator, and a biologist. It's somewhere there.
Oh, that's beautiful. And showing the respect to want to know what you're tracking, to show it respect. We just interviewed Avi Loeb, a Harvard astronomer, and he said he applies rigorous curiosity to remain open, to ask these questions about the universe, but rigorous curiosity is applied. And we have his colleague coming up, Edwin Turner, and he says that his methodology is being critical in methodology while unfettered in imagination. So I think that even the detectives that are out there looking at various fields are applying similar, they're all trackers as well, right? We're tracking knowledge. We're tracking our worldview. We're tracking the pieces to put in and construct it. So I think these lessons apply so broadly. It's exciting to talk about them in these terms. Do you have comments?
Oh, no. First of all, the application of your work and bringing it to a more to the broader perspective of our own lives is a very powerful concept, and I look forward to following those steps and reviewing my life, looking through the eyes of a tracker.
This consciously.
I like that idea,
Yeah, indeed.
We've got a program we've just launched called Tracking Success. I think I sent you the newsletter over the week, Laura, and it's a virtual adventure. It's an interactive documentary. We take people tracking. What we did was, tell you how we did it. But we filmed ourselves tracking lion, leopard, and rhino for a month, and the camera crew filmed everything: the good, the bad, the ugly, and all our decisions. And all the encounters we had. And then we took all of this and we strung it into a single storyline, and we make that storyline the participant storyline. So every time we had to make a decision, the video stops, and the participants now decide what they want to do. Do they want to follow the oxpecker's alarm, or do they want to continue on the tracking, on the tracks? And we filmed the outcomes of all of their decisions, a little bit like those build your own or choose your own adventure books in the old days.
Yeah,
it's a branching decision tree, but we take people on this virtual tracking adventure, and then in turn they get them to internalize the process of tracking, and then after that we go into that model that I spoke to. About it.
It sounds like a great video game. You should be marketing this.
It could be a reality TV show on the Discovery Channel, and
that would be good. Yeah.
We just signed an agreement with David Covey of 7 Habits of Highly Effective. They're going to distribute it for us. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Well, we'll look at that up too as well.
How fun.
Cam had an interesting comment. He said,
Cam always does. So.
Sasquatch is the hide and seek champion of the world. The whole mythology around Bigfoot and how we've never been able to, but the story continues. It just doesn't go away.
Yes. Absolutely. Wow, look into that.
Yeah. I think they did a study on successful CEOs and the ones that said, I feel it in my gut. I just go with my gut. I'm willing to feel my feelings and gather up information that maybe isn't intellectual, do really well. That's a skill set. I don't say it's mystical. I know that you say this is very practical knowledge, but I do think that we're capable of picking up information through normal channels without us being fully intellectually aware of it.
Consciously aware, yes.
Yeah.
No, I agree with that.
Do you want to describe that feeling for yourself?
Well, the other day, I was on my own with a group of people, and they desperately wanted to see a leopard. It was very hot, and we found tracks, and I followed the tracks for a little bit, but I lost the trail. It was very, very hot. The tracks weren't so fresh. They were from the morning. By this time, we were 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and I didn't want to leave them in the Land Rover for too long. So I said to them, let's just get back in the vehicle and have a look. And they said to me, where are you going to go and look now? I mean, we were in a 20,000 acre area. And I said, no, I've got a sense of where the leopard could go, will go. And I drove for about 6 or 7 minutes, and I found the leopard. And everybody thought, geez, how did you do that? And I realized, and I said, I don't know how I did that. I just had a sense where the leopard. But later on, we were around the fire, and we were deconstructing it. And I realized that I'd seen tracks of a herd of impala going in the same direction. I knew it was hot. I knew the leopard would have gone, the impala would have gone to drink. I knew the leopard would have followed. If it was moving in the middle of the day, it would have been hungry. It was probably going after the impala. If it was successful, it would be in a tree near the waterhole. If it was unsuccessful, late afternoon in February, they're definitely going to be up in the tree taking advantage of the cool wind. And that it must be somewhere there. And that, so I could explain it. I could explain it, but I don't. But yeah, I mean, that's an example that I could explain. There have been examples that I cannot explain. A lot of examples by Renius. Renius it's almost uncanny how successful how his strike rate is so high. And often he'll say, I don't know, you know. You don't really consider like to have a conversation.
Yeah.
Do you have some stories to illustrate that? Oh my gosh. So
the other day he said, I actually wrote it in the book. He the other day, this was a couple of years ago now, but we were drinking a cup of coffee, and he turned with our students. He turned to the students and said, "Would you like to see a python?" You know what a python is? A big, like an anaconda, a big constricting snake. And they said, yes, we'd love to. And he walked off with his coffee mug into the bush, and he said, come with me. And he walked off 20 or 30 yards, and he looked under some trees, and he walked on, and eventually he found a python coiled up low in a tree, not very far off the ground. And there this python was. It wasn't the biggest python. It was maybe a 1.5 or 2 meter long python. They get much bigger. But and everyone wanted to know, how did you do that? How do you know? He says, no, but I heard the birds alarming. So I said, but birds alarm for lots of snakes. How did you know it was a python? And he cannot explain that. He can't tell me.
You know what you know.
You know what you know.
Fabulous.
Well, I do have go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I do have a story to share with you that I heard direct from this biologist who had worked in the Amazon. And I just give this to you because a secondhand story, but she's very credible. Her name is Vicky. And she said that working with the tribe in the Amazon, she was following them on their hunt. She followed one hunter. They disperse into the forest. One of them makes a kill because suddenly her hunter goes and follows a trail. All the other hunters show up. One of them had made a kill, and he needed the help of the rest to take it back to the village. She said, to this day, I don't understand how he knew where to go. There's no cell phones. There was no calling by the hunters. There was no nothing. How did they know? And so sometimes it feels like you can get into the groove. I don't know. People have those experiences. Mm-hmm. I know that my sister talks about going out on a boat for 3 months up in the channel where
Alaska.
Up into the Alaskan inner channel, British Columbia. And she said that her husband, who was a guitar player, would be out playing his guitar. They'd be there by a cliff, and just this beautiful, all alone. The bear would come up on the cliff and sit like this and just listen. The orca would come up, the birds would come up, wildlife came up to listen and to interact, to just be there. She said that after a while, and I haven't had that time to be alone in nature, away from cities to that degree. She just said your mind gets into a groove where you're just there. It reaches some other level, and you're communing with nature. Your heart goes out to nature. You're there, and it comes up subtly. It wasn't an effort. It just happens. You're reading the signs. You're breathing into the gestalt. I don't know.
That happens when you've been there a while and you start to get immersed in that environment. You start. I would start to, we would work 3 months on, and then we'd get a month off. And always that last 2 weeks of the 3-month stint was when Renius and I were at our most effective. That's when I would be dreaming a lot. That's where we had a very good sense of where the animals were moving, and we were seeing it like a soccer ball. Yeah.
Well, I can only imagine our early hunter-gatherer ancestors who were immersed in that continuously back when there weren't a lot of people, there weren't a lot of structure, that was just nature, to be in that mindset all the time and go deeper and deeper. I mean, it's just fascinating.
And Jamie has a question. She's asking, do you make a distinction between being a tracker as compared to being someone who's a guide?
Yes, we do. Yeah, so the tracker is the person that is responsible for finding the animal, getting off on foot and following the tracks and finding the animals for the get. The guide is the host, the driver, the interpreter.
I see.
And so Renius was on that little seat in front, so he could be right there and see the tracks first and guide the driver.
I was the guide and Renius was the tracker in the beginning. And then when I learned to track, we would switch roles a lot. Especially if I got tired of the guests, then I'd become the tracker for the
Okay.
I love your honesty.
One thing I do want to I quote out of your book. You say, I want some comments on this. Long tradition of respect for animals. The local Shangaan people moved periodically, resulting in somewhat sustainable utilization of natural resources in a given area. Ample and clear historical evidence of reverence shown for wild animals by hunter-gatherers, as well as spiritual customs that prohibited killing of certain species. So what do you know of the way of life? What can you tell us? You met with Aboriginal elders, you met with the Shangaan elders, you met with the Bushmen. What can you parlay of that respect for life, of that wisdom that we can utilize today?
I think sort of an overarching response would be, when the colonial people arrived in Southern Africa in the 1600s, obviously there'd been no white people here. By the mid-1700s, it was well documented that the numbers of animals in the Kruger Park area, what is today the Kruger Park area, the Highveld, it was teeming with animals. And in less than 100 years, the colonial sport hunters had wiped out most of those herds. So the colonial sport hunters found Africa abundant. They found the animals, found the place in a situation where it was teeming with animals. And in less than 100 years, they were having to legislate laws to protect animals because so many of them were gone. So if that's not an example that the local indigenous people here, who had been here for thousands and thousands of years, they were living in partnership with nature, and it's quite clear. I mean, the historical records are there to show how the impact that these sport hunters, the colonial sport hunters, had on the indigenous animals in Southern Africa. It was a massive, in a very, very short space of time.
We hear similar stories with the Native Americans here and the abundance of wildlife before we arrived.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and Renius and his father, they will tell you they only hunted what they could eat, and they didn't have fridges, they didn't have electricity, they had no way of storing. So you hunted what you needed. They were confident in nature's abundance. And they would eat what they needed, and then that was it. There was never this idea of hoarding. And the Bushman people I spent with just the other day, the fellow was telling me about, they just don't. Hoarding is frowned upon, and they take it.
There's no need for it. Your environment provides for you readily, right?
Yes. And so it's interesting. This fellow told me that when a Bushman hunter returns from a successful hunt with an antelope, they do what they insult the meat, and they insult the hunter. And they say things like, "Why is that kudu so thin? Why do you take so long?" And they just insult. We actually witnessed it, and look, you can't understand them because they're speaking in a language I didn't understand. But I thought something was wrong. I really got Renius and I really thought something was wrong. And around the fire later, they said, no, we insult the hunter to cool his heart, to make sure that he doesn't become too overconfident and arrogant.
Stay humble. Stay humble.
Cool his heart. Yeah, I remember
Well,
that was.
one other quick story about how successful this lifestyle was and how healthy we once were living as indigenous tribes. When we were in Australia, I got to sit next at a glamping dinner next to a male nurse. He was a nurse from Tasmania. And I was asking him about a story I just read about the Tintubo 7. There were 7 Aboriginal children that grew up in the bush after the government had come through and grabbed all the kids and taken them away or relocated tribes. They had been away on a hunt, and there was 7 children that took care of themselves, teenagers, by going from watering hole to watering hole, hunting along the way, and just following their truck, their lifestyle. They were found years later. They were tracked by a member of their tribe that had joined Western civilization and tracked in the desert and found. And they were examined by a doctor who thought, wow, you've just come in out of the bush and living in this really desert-like conditions. They were perfectly healthy. He said, I'd never seen any humans in better, perfect health. And these kids living that way. Yeah. And of course, then they introduced sugar and white flour and alcohol and, all the rest of it. And another story. They all became artists and are very happy. Yeah. But anyway, I just wanted to say that it was a healthy lifestyle. It was a sustainable lifestyle. I just want to give credit where credit is due to the ancestors and those ways of life and how conditioned we are by evolution to live this way. And that I really appreciate all that you are doing and all the other people we've talked to who are taking ancient bodies of knowledge and documenting them and preserving them and giving them relevance today. That these are like libraries burning down when the last elders are gone. And so I think you're doing such a marvelous job of preserving this once oral tradition, this body of knowledge, and making it relevant for today. It's such an important task to honor those who came before and to say that we have such a rich tapestry of wisdom for the human race, and much of it should be teaching us to become more responsible members of the web of life so that we can endure for the next 200,000 years going forward. We're going to need those skill sets. We're going to need that relationship with our environment, with everything else on our planet, with our universe. We need these skill sets. And what a fascinating life you're living to preserve this and make this relevant and
really
bring this
thank you, Alex.
To everyone.
Yeah.
And what is the business response? When you bring this to business people, what is the response that you get, these insights that you're bringing?
It's been overwhelming. It's really been an interesting one. And when you bring such a pure approach and the idea that this knowledge has been with us all along, and when you point out the obvious, the sort of aha moments that happen are incredible, and that we are all born to track, and we're tracking. We just need to. We don't need to be taught to track. We know how to track. We need to be. We need to highlight what are those mindsets we need to work on that are preventing us from tracking.
Yeah, the mental game, the inner mental game. And I appreciate how, in your book, how vulnerable you are to show the real story of growing up, of dealing with these doubts and fears, of learning the skill sets and applying them, of really cloaking ourselves in a body of wisdom that's there and imbibing it on such a deep level. I appreciated your book, Leopard Changing Its Spots, for that. Yeah. I think those are life lessons that are so important for all of us at any stage of life to embrace. So I appreciated it for that, and the tracker manual. And how do we participate in this online course that you described? Because I think that would be so fun to put oneself through the paces and follow an actual tracking journey. What a great idea to digitize that and make that available online? What is the?
It's so right now, if you wanted to, you'd contact me and we set up a time and then
I see.
We run it for you, but it is being put online so that you'll be able to sort of plug and play types. So you'll be able to download it and do it in the comfort of your home.
Yeah, that's exciting. So anyway, thank you. Any last words of wisdom? Yeah.
No, well,
you shared a lot.
Sorry.
I said you've shared a lot. Thank you.
Go enjoy your daughters and your beautiful family.
I was so curious what tracking was about, and you've really relayed what it is, what is employed, to do so.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
I think, tracking is my last thing. If I could say something, is that it is the most. It engages you with nature in the most intimate way. To follow in the footsteps of a white-tailed deer for 30 minutes, you will learn more about that deer. You'll learn about the little critters that are interacting with that deer, how that deer is interacting with its environment. More in those 30 minutes, it'll give you an appreciation for nature and for nature's language that you cannot get from a book or from an ordinary hike or from a documentary. By going on foot and walking in the footsteps of an animal and engaging in its landscape on its same level is when we really grow empathy towards the natural world.
Yeah. Well, even when you talk about a leopard who knows he's been spotted and he'll lift his tail up to show the white tip of the tail to say, stop alarming, I know I've been seen, like game over. Yeah. We, to say give up, what do? We raise a white flag. So we have a similar language. So I think it's so interesting, the shared language that we have with the wild in these interesting gestures that they do, we do. So that we're just part of that.
To gain exposure to that language, you've got to spend time.
Yeah.
Discipline.
Just like you would learn any language, right? You immerse yourself in it and you spend time.
Like computer programming seems mystical to those of us that are not computer programmers. Yes. It takes time.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. That was Alex van den Heever and the Tracker Academy and Leopard Changing its Spots. And thank you.